Nearly 7 years ago, on June 14th, 2018, Devoid, or Richard Svensson, the founder of Valheim and CEO of Irongate, released the game we now know and love. Not on Steam, but a lesser known website called itch.io. If you navigate to its page today, the game is nowhere to be found, but I tracked it down, and today, we overcome Old Look Draugr, hunt glowing deer, find a meteorite from space, and do battle with two unique trolls, and ultimately beat the alpha version of Valheim. Spawning in, my first impression was of familiarity with a world known to me, but rather than meadows, the environment resembled more Black Forest, which quickly proved accurate as I was immediately swarmed by Grey Dwarfs that did not look unlike the version of them we have today. One notable difference was the intense music that started as they engaged, and by the end of my playthrough, I grew a little sick of this tune, setting off with every combat encounter. While scrambling to gather the basic resources for a weapon, I quickly noticed the clearly massive changes to the user interface. A horizontal health bar, no stamina bar, and 7 hotbar slots instead of the current 8. The inventory too was smaller back then, and many of the item icons have clearly changed. Fortunately, I was able to scrap together enough materials and crafted the club and set my sights on slapping the many Grey Dwarf around. Combat too was very different. The stamina bar was a simple white line, and I learned to stop depleting it entirely as it would eliminate the ability to sprint or attack until it recovered, indicated by its flickering. I tried parrying their attacks too, but as it turns out that while I could block for reduced damage, the parry mechanic had not yet been introduced. As I took down the Grey Dwarf one by one, I noticed acquiring a very different looking Grey Dwarf eye that unlocked the portal recipe. It appeared maybe Surtling cores had not yet been introduced to the game. After some patience and hard work, I was able to whittle down their numbers until I was finally alone, but was bewildered to hear a ringing sound and appearance of meat at the altar surrounded by the circle of stones. This, as it turns out, was a common mechanic in Alpha Valheim that I wouldn't understand until far later. But when picking up the meat, I came to the sudden realization that the stones are quite familiar and still exist in the game today. I recall a rumor that the original intent of the stone circles was that portaling would be restricted within them. As I learn a little later, that rumor may have been false or at least untrue in this version. With night falling, it was time to make shelter, so I crafted the basic hammer, axe, and decided to gather some wood. Of course, it began to rain, which appeared to give me the wet status like it does today, definitely reducing my stamina regeneration, being a huge pain. Alas, I persevered and got to tree chopping. As I started, I wondered to myself if tree damage was a thing. Yep, trees could definitely still hurt you. In fact, it appeared the tree chopping mechanic hadn't changed much at all. With wood acquired, I set to building my first base with many of the structures you would recognize: campfire, cooking station, workbench, portal, and basic chests. Of course, like today, the workbench needed shelter, so I got to work on building my first fabulous home. Once done, the recipes at the workbench gave me hints as to what may come in the pickaxe, which was already craftable. Perhaps Eikthyr was not yet realized in this version. Also, my favorite weapon in the flint spear was dramatically different, called the throwing spear that stacked up to 4. On one hand, you could throw several instances of them, but unlike the spear today, had no melee option. Despite this, it naturally became my weapon of choice for much of the playthrough. Before setting out on adventure, I thought it wise to lay down in bed and sleep through the night. As it turns out, while beds could be used to set your spawn, sleeping was not yet a mechanic, so I would need to outlast the dangerous evenings. In the morning, I set out in search of deer, which I was sure I was hearing in the distance while building my base. While deer eluded me, I soon encountered an unfamiliar wooden shack surrounded by Grey Dwarf. I dispatched them and noticed a light source from inside, and when I entered, I found another one of them just chillin'. At least there was loot inside where I found both Surtling cores and deer hide. Surtling core did exist, after all. With these resources, I unlocked recipes for the familiar furnace, kiln, raft, and bow, which foreshadowed what was to come. However, I did not expect the biggest challenge of this playthrough so far, over the crest of the next hill in my first burial chamber, or so I would learn a little later, simply named a generic dungeon. Oh shit. Wait, are those? Those are Draugr, okay. Outside, to my surprise, were not skeleton, but Draugr. and not the Draugr you're used to seeing, but a more generic and ugly version. If you didn't know, this version of Draugr still exists in the current game code, where you can spawn them in with dev commands as target dummies. Part of me still kinda wishes target dummies were craftable fixtures in the game. To no surprise, I learned these guys pack much more of a punch than the Grey Dwarf. But with some careful spear throws and patience, I took them down and entered the chamber. Inside was much simpler than what we are used to in current burial chambers, consisting only of a small cross-shaped room with, yes, more Draugr. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way how death works in Alpha Valheim, as the 2 Draugr were too much for me. As expected, I respawned at the bed I had set and was safely able to return to my tombstone and reclaim my goods. Like the stone circles before, after defeating the last Draugr, resources spawned at the chamber altar, but this time, troll leather, which gave me hope we would encounter some trolls at some point during the playthrough. I quickly learned that one of the game's core mechanics was combat encounters at chambers, stone circles, or even random stumps, which when cleared, would reward you with some random resources. Aside from the altar rewards, the chamber contained 2 chests with materials, but also boxes, of which I think are the same assets now used to represent loot left over from a sunken boat, which I thought was pretty cool. Before continuing the journey, I had the thought, can I build in here? As it turns out, you can. I laid down my bench, smelter, stored some gear, crafted my bow, and head back out with a taste of deer meat on my tongue. Of course, the first thing I did was confirm, yep, fall damage was in the game. Ouch. To the surprise of no one, I discovered the bow shoots arrows like a limp noodle, staying true to the game's current crude bow. Despite it, I soon bagged my first deer. It became clear boar did not exist in the game, and the only passive animal I encountered were the deer that dropped generic raw meat and of course their hide. At this point, I really began to wonder if the game lacked any other biomes in its alpha, as everything I had experienced so far felt like a hybrid of meadows and black forest. Fortunately, I would soon be proven very wrong. After emerging from another dungeon, I noticed what had to be a mountain and began to climb its slopes. As expected, I began freezing, losing health, and quickly got out of there. My first impression was that the mountains must not have been developed yet, but would later learn there was more than met the eye. As I continued exploring, these elevated columns became more frequent and had chests at their peaks. I thought to myself there had to be something useful in there. But before I could plan my climb, I noticed what seemed to resemble tin on the shore, and sure enough, it was. Tin was not mineable back then and merely had to be picked from the ground. Blueberries too came into my view and started to give me hope that maybe there were other biomes after all. With tin found, I was eager to smelt it and mark my map for the column's location, and lay down my portal to head back home and refine the tin. It connected to the one at home, but rather than glow red, it was blue. I also noticed I did not have the ability to name the portal, so it seemed a single pair of them was all that was possible in this version of the game. Metal ore, to my relief, was not portal restricted at this stage of the game's development. At home, to my dismay, the smelter would not receive the tin, which left me puzzled as to what the smelter was even used for in this version. But I would learn soon enough. I returned to the column and built up to it easily, because I'm a professional builder. Unfortunately, the chest loot left a lot to be desired. I learned later that for whatever reason, Alpha Valheim has a bit of an obsession with requiring you to build up to things, as you will see when we get to the game's boss. I continued adventuring and finally seemed to find indications that I may be approaching real Black Forest, all but confirmed when I spotted Thistle and was surprised by a shaman behind me. The Grey Dwarf shaman appeared to resemble almost exactly as it does today, both having a poison spray and healing ability despite its label referring to it as a generic Grey Dwarf. Upon defeating him, I was rewarded with an ancient seed, giving me further hope a boss battle was in store for me. After a quick portal and rest back home, I returned to begin what I confirmed to be a Black Forest conquest with its signature pine trees and abruptly a boss altar matching closely what we have today, and yes, even then, suggested I burn their young. At first, I thought I was incredibly lucky to have found the altar so quickly, but as I learned later how common they were, crossing paths with easily a dozen of them along my journey. And with that, my new goal was set. Find more ancient seeds to summon the boss, of which I could only assume to be the Elder. Curiously, I almost immediately stumbled into Surtling, who appeared to behave just as they do now, despite being in the Black Forest and not their own native swamp. With them dispatched, I hopped into the nearby burial chamber, wondering if the Black Forest versions would be any different. It turns out not, bearing the same shape, chests, and loot reward upon clearing them. As night was falling, I found a gathering of Draugr around a stone structure and tried luring them to the light of the altar, only to be rudely interrupted by my first Greydwarf brute, which like the shaman matched the current one in appearance and moveset despite being labeled a Greydwarf. While clearing out the final jogger, I heard the iconic and familiar groan. Yep, it was a troll alright. Before engaging, I thought it wise to lay down my portal in case it took a turn for the worst. As I approached, it became clear to me the game's troll looked significantly different than it does today, both in its color and overall character model. Despite the difference in appearance, its moveset resembled the big blue boys we now know and love. Using my patented spear and dodging I've practiced so many times, I was able to carefully outmaneuver and take him down, rewarding me with more troll hide, bringing me closer to crafting his iconic armor set. While this troll looks far different than what you're used to, there's actually a small Easter egg in the existing Valheim code that makes reference to this guy, of which I'll show you when we get to the mountains. But for now, it was time to search the Black Forest for more ancient seeds. However, almost immediately, I found something more interesting. In the distance, I spotted a square collection of what appeared to be gray and green rock, surrounded by a party of Greydwarf. Upon clearing them, I confirmed what I thought was in fact copper. Finally, I had a use for my pickaxe and got to mining. Not unlike the game now, copper mining is an absolute grind as I slowly picked away at the ore and waited for my stamina to return. Returning home, I moved my smelter and kilns outside and took another shot at smelting metal and was relieved to smelt the bars, unlocking the forge recipe. With it came new recipes for a helmet, sword, and dagger that required a combination of copper bars and tin ore, which explained its lack of necessity for smelting. I crafted the helmet, and now with having 3 ancient seeds, it was time to summon the boss. Returning to his altar, I built a stair and summoned nothing. As it turns out, 3 were not enough back then, and I had to set out for more. While on my quest, I encountered more copper to mine, but was seriously struggling to find more seeds. On the bright side, I did encounter a very familiar structure. A Greydwarf tower that is the same today, right down to the barrel and chair at its exterior. Pretty darn cool, I thought. And suddenly, I saw this deer in the distance. But it was glowing? Could this be the alpha version of Eikthyr? I began peppering it with arrows and knew I couldn't let this thing get away. I even managed to get some assistance from a nearby Draugr, but my goodness, this doe had a lot of health. I chased and shot, and was finally able to take the beast down. But the rewards were nothing if not disappointing, giving me only extra meat and deer hide. Perhaps this was the equivalent of a star version of deer? To ease my disappointment, I decided to head back home and use the copper I had gathered to craft the bronze sword and saw an opportunity to cut through an unexplored mountain which had a surprise waiting for me. It was at this point when inspecting my map, I noticed that biomes were colored differently as they were in the game today, with the mountains being a lighter, almost tan color that would certainly be useful for finding other biomes a little later. As I took the crest of the hill, one of the rocks caught my attention, appearing different than the others. To my surprise, it was iron ore. I mined a little of it, but with my lack of inventory space and the freezing temperatures, I opted to mark the ore and return later. At home, I finally had sufficient materials to craft the bronze sword and used it to help gather the final 2 ancient seed I needed to summon the boss. Or at least I thought. As I returned to the altar to sacrifice the seeds, once again, I did not have enough. At this point, all I could assume was I needed the full stack of 10, so I set out and got 5 more to bring forth the beast. Over the next hour, I ventured far and wide, slowly picking up the final required ancient seeds across the map. I spotted swamp trees in the distance, an adventure for later, defeated another forest troll, and as a result, acquired enough troll hide to arm myself with the troll armor, even then, one of the most stunning armor sets in the game. And with that done, surely 10 seeds would be enough. And it was! As expected, the Elder himself appeared on his back and stood up, looking not exactly like he does now, but very close, but with a noticeably simplified health bar. Shockingly, his attack set appeared almost the same without the ability to summon Root. What stuck out to me the most was how jarring the screen shake was, without an option to disable it in this version. I even tried burning him with a campfire, but as it turns out, this speedrunning strategy wasn't viable at this time. In spite of this, with some patience and well-timed dodges, I was able to take him down and be rewarded with some unexpected drops. The first was Elder Bark, unlocking the incredibly different Viking ship I set sail on a little later. However, what stuck out to me most was the name of the drop. Interesting enough, it explained to me why the internal ID for Ancient Bark in the current version of Valheim is Elder Bark, despite it now being called Ancient. Absolutely fascinating, at least to me. Further, the Elder dropped his heart that rather than serving as a tool, fulfilled its purpose as a consumable, increasing my max health, a welcome bonus. But there was no time to celebrate as I had iron to gather and new biomes to explore. Returning to the iron ore in the mountains I marked earlier, I made sure to come properly prepared with sufficient food. What I learned about the food mechanic while playing was that while you can only eat a single piece at once, it appeared that while you were fully fed, you would receive passive healing that outpaced the freezing damage caused by the cold. Of course, as I lay my pick into the rock came my biggest surprise of my playthrough so far. What'd I just hear? What the hell? Yes, another troll, and this time of the more familiar blue variety. Despite there no longer being two trolls in the early access version of Valheim, there are still remnants of its existence. If you use cheats, you can insert two distinct commands of spawn Trophy Forest Troll or Trophy Frost Troll. While both commands summon an item, only the Frost Troll version is modeled, but you can catch a quick glimpse of the Forest version as you interact with the invisible object, as well as in your inventory. Look familiar? Forgive me for nerding out there for a second. Back to our story. After collecting myself from the shock of a second troll, I figured I would test out the old troll's excavating abilities. To my delight, they worked great at destroying the iron ore for me. Although, I sadly did lose him when trying to kite him to a second iron ore deposit. With my pockets full, I returned home and smelted it, unlocking more recipes for my forge in the iron arrow, axe, pickaxe, and sword. However, I would need quite a bit more. I did, however, craft the stone cutter, which to no surprise enabled the crafting of a ton of stone structures. With that out of the way, it was time for me to set my sights on finding Swamp, which had me wondering what I would find there if iron was in the mountains. After a short walk, I saw the iconic spiky trees in the distance and entered the wetland, appearing much as it does today. As a surprise to nobody, Draugr and Surtling soon found me. Apart from that, I didn't come across much new in this biome until I encountered a massive deposit of iron. Like copper before it, was surrounded by rock and was tedious to mine, considering all the attention the mining drew from nearby swamp inhabitants. That said, in time, I gathered enough iron to craft a full suite of iron weapons and tools, and despite my intentions, stumbled into the plains. For the most part, this biome was barren, made notable by massive rock pillars scattered throughout, resembling more closely the stones surrounding Yaglu's spawn rather than the typical rock pillar. As I delved further, I found that yet again, Surtling populated this biome, but were weirdly huddled around something. As I approached and dispatched the flame sprites, I found a meteorite. Not what I expected at all, and upon picking it, rewarded me with iron. What struck me most about the plains was that despite its lack of content at this stage, it maintained its beauty throughout its development, remaining as it stands today, one of the game's most gorgeous biomes. But soon, I found myself without land to follow and decided to place a ship for sale. While roughly equal to the ship we have now, it came decorated with colorful shields on its sides and a rudimentary steering system. While I liked the look, its steering left a lot to be desired. And if you enjoyed the alpha version, you might enjoy a bath of nostalgia by checking out this video where I played the launch version of Valheim on Steam way back in 2021.